Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wendy Novak, President and CEO of Associated Builders and Contractors of Western Washington, and we're excited to welcome you to our first ever town hall. As we get started, let's review some information regarding the event. You'll notice that this is not our typical Zoom meeting. You'll see the candidates and the moderator, but not everyone else who's attending. In the webinar format, we want to hear from you through the Q&A icon in the control panel. Let us know if you have any questions, and if you're having technical difficulties and need assistance, Janessa, our events manager, is here to help. So just put a little note in there and she will help you with any technical needs you have. This event is being recorded and it'll be available to view through the primary election on Tuesday, August 4th. The link will be provided to members in our News of Merit, which is our electronic newsletter, next week, along with the announcement of the candidate that earns ABC's endorsement and campaign contribution from the ABC of Western Washington PAC. And now I'd like to introduce Josh Greasy of Washington Commercial Painters and our Government Affairs Council Chair.
Thanks, Wendy, and good afternoon, everyone. Today's virtual town hall features candidates from Washington's 10th congressional district, and here are a few things you should know to better understand why we chose this race to highlight for our members. This election is the only open congressional seat in Washington State, currently represented by Denny Heck, who is running for Lieutenant Governor. The 10th district is comprised of most of Pierce, Thurston counties, and part of Mason County. ABC members in those counties represent 18% of our chapter's membership, so big swath of our members. And there are 19 candidates running currently for this 10th district, and we selected 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans who we felt were most likely to align with our members. And now I'd like to introduce Andy Kaplowitz, Vice President of Government Affairs with ABC of Western Washington and the moderator for this town hall.
Well, thank you, Wendy and Josh, and thanks to ABC members, their employees, and voting age family members for tuning in, and thank you also to our candidates for participating. This event is the first of 3 live events as part of ABC of Western Washington's Access to Influence 2020 campaign. The campaign's goals include to help control the narrative about ABC of Western Washington, to expand the chapter's political clout and influence political outcomes, to increase member access to thought leaders and business decision makers through key strategic partnerships, added ABC of Western Washington events, and more, to enhance our effectiveness delivering the open shop message locally in Olympia and in Washington, D.C., and of course to attract new members as well. We'd like to thank our campaign sponsors for Access to Influence. We have Axthelm Construction, Washington Commercial Painters, Groveland Construction, Burnson and Porter, and Bennett Electric. We'd also like to recognize ABC of Western Washington's board members in attendance today. We have Jason Wandler, our board chair. We have our chair-elect Glenn Kuntz. We have our immediate past president, Travis Hull, Government Affairs Council Chair, Josh Greasy, Membership Council Chair, Stephanie Carlin. We have our Safety Council Chair, Don Lance, and Directors Shelley Bloom, Cindy Axthelm, Scott Garcia, and Eric Brock. Folks, this is as grassroots as it gets. The word democracy comes from the Greek roots demos, for the people, and kratos, to rule. The U.S. is a democratic republic with representatives who speak for the people of their district. ABC town halls are bringing candidates in important races to our members. You'll hear them answer questions specific to the construction economy and address issues that impact your business and working families. Whether you live in the district that votes or not, decisions from Congress impact all of us. This fall, voters will elect a new Congress, and all 435 seats will be decided. There are just 7 or 8 open seats, and the Washington 10th is the only congressional seat in the state where the incumbent is not running for re-election. While we're focused on economic issues and the construction economy, we encourage you to do your homework and visit each candidate's website, read your voter's pamphlet, read the news, and as you can see from the media bias chart, not all reporting is created equal. So we encourage you to read from multiple news sources that offer different perspectives. Today's town hall is an opportunity for you to help decide ABC's endorsed candidate for the Washington 10th primary. So let's review our virtual town hall tenets. Our members compete with other contractors every single day, and they don't take swipes at each other. So candidates, we ask you to put your best foot forward, focus on the merits of your candidacy, and let your ambitions and accomplishments speak for themselves. We support competition. We don't want pot shots. Questions were developed in consultation with ABC of Western Washington members, our board of directors, our Government Affairs Council, the Diversity Committee, and ABC's National Government Affairs team. Questions were provided to the candidates in advance. Construction projects have timelines, and so does our town hall. Candidates will each have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 3 minutes to answer each question, and 2 minutes for closing statements as well. Time will be strictly monitored. When your time is up, I will interrupt and provide the next candidate an opportunity to answer or advance to the next question. The starting rotation was determined randomly in advance, and each candidate will have at least one opportunity to answer first and last between the opening statement, the 5 questions asked, and the closing statement. And now, it's time to meet the candidates for Washington's open 10th Congressional District. Christine Reeves, Jackson Maynard, Marilyn Strickland, and Nancy Daly Slotnick. Based on the random selection process, we'll start with the 2-minute opening statements with Marilyn Strickland.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for hosting this forum. It is an honor to be here today. My name is Marilyn Strickland, and I hope to be the next member of Congress to represent the 10th District. I'm the former mayor of Tacoma. I'm the former CEO of the Seattle Metro Chamber, and I'm running for Congress really based on the experience that my family had. When I was growing up, my father served in the military for 20 some odd years, and we had a roof over our head, we had food on the table, we had access to reliable health care through Madigan Army Medical Center, and we knew that my father would have a comfortable retirement based on his service. That's not true today for so many people. And I have spent the last decade and a half working on jobs, opportunity, fairness, and economic security for all people. Now, when I think about what I hope to accomplish, of course, there are the myriad of policies that we talk about: housing, healthcare, economic opportunity, addressing transportation, climate change, all those things. But also it's important to realize what is in front of us right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic, we have an economic crisis, and we know that there is social unrest and racial strife. So those are the things I believe require our immediate attention. And how's this related to the job that you're doing here and the work that you do? This is about economic opportunity. When people ask me, dig down deeply and tell me exactly what it is and why you want to do this job, it's where I come from. I come from underserved communities. I come from communities that have been denied opportunity. And I want to make sure that as we talk about the American dream and what's possible, that every single person who calls America home has access to a decent job, make a decent living, and can retire with dignity. That's what's important. Now, we know realistically the system is not equitable. So what are we going to do together? Bringing business, labor, nonprofit, and every entity together to say, we all have a stake in ensuring that economic security is something that every person gets to benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Next is Nancy Daly Slotnick with her opening statement.
Hello, thank you so much for holding this forum today. My name is Nancy Daly Slotnick, and I never aspired to run for political office. I considered the 25 years that I served in the U.S. military to be my public service. But several years ago, I found myself growing more and more disturbed by the growing division in our nation's capital and the hyperpartisanship, and said we can do better. And as a veteran, in the military, we all come from different backgrounds, but we learn to work together to accomplish a common goal. And so that's what I feel we need to be accomplishing in Congress. So I threw my hat in the ring. I'm a 25-year Army veteran, the wife of a veteran, the mother of 2 veterans, a disabled child, and a blue-collar worker. And my husband was an Army engineer. So there's a tie to construction there. My son was a combat engineer in the Army, but my father-in-law was a union carpenter, and my brother-in-law is a non-union carpenter. So I have all of that covered. And also, my husband and I, in our small business, we're small business owners that we do critical infrastructure protection work. And so we do a lot of work with Sound Transit. We do, and more, we're seeing companies that do the construction for Sound Transit come to us for their pre-design review for security of their facilities. And I don't see a timer, so I have no idea how much time I have left. But I am hoping to be the next member of Congress from Washington's 10th Congressional District, and to do the best to support this community that I've lived in for 33 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And when we have tech glitches like this, I'll just have a timer going myself, and I'll just you'll probably hear the iPhone chime when it's done.
Okay.
How's that? Sorry, folks. So thank you, Nancy. And now the opening statement from Christine Reeves.
Well, good afternoon to the board. Thank you so much for hosting this forum today. My name is Christine Reeves, and I have the honor and the privilege of asking for your vote to be the next Congresswoman from the 10th District. I want to share a little bit about who I am and where I come from, because I think it shapes very deeply my values and the work that we need to do both in our state and in Congress. I grew up the daughter of a single mom in a small rural farming community in Eastern Washington. Unfortunately, my mom struggled with substance use issues, so I spent about the first 10 years of my life in and out of foster care. So I learned at a really early age that it was people in places like Olympia and DC who would decide whether or not kids like me had educational and economic opportunity. When my mom got divorced from my stepdad at the age of 16, our family found ourselves homeless, and I ended up on my own. Had it not been for amazing public school educators in our system, I don't know where I would be today. Because of them, I had the opportunity to work my way through high school and college, and ended up becoming the first in my family to graduate. So I know what it's like to struggle. I know what working families go through, but I also know what it's like to overcome and to work hard for the things that we care about. I went on to serve as an immigration advisor, helping hundreds of international students come to the US to pursue educational opportunity, served as a district director in Tacoma for Senator Patty Murray for 5 years, and then went on to serve our state as an economic development director on behalf of veterans and military families in our communities. I ran for public office for the first time because I was a mom. The biggest issue facing our state in 2016 was how to fully fund K-12 education. And as somebody who believes that it was educational opportunity and public school educators that saved my life, I wanted every single kid in our state to have the same opportunity. So I ran, I won, I served in the legislature for the last 3 years, but I stepped down from the legislature because I'm not worried about whether or not we're going to keep doing work here in this Washington. I'm absolutely petrified about what's not happening on behalf of working families in the other Washington. And I want the opportunity to go to DC to keep fighting for our kids, for our communities, for working families, and an economy that's going to put people first. I look forward to the opportunity to answer more of your questions today and to share more about the work that we need to do in DC. But for now, just thank you for having us, and I look forward to earning your vote.
Thank you, Christine. Next is Jackson Maynard on his opening statement.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you. I'm sorry, are you able to see me? It doesn't look like the image is coming through. Okay.
Yeah, we see, I think.
Sorry, I thought there was a technical difficulty there. So anyway, I want to thank ABC of Western Washington for hosting this. I think I've got a unique perspective and background on the issues that face the construction industry. And in Congress, I want to be a fierce advocate for this industry. I think that what you do and the hurdles that you face in just trying to get something built in this state, whether it be a home or an office building or a public works project, is incredible. And I want to do as much possible to make that easier for you. I've devoted a substantial amount of my career to this industry. I was a construction lawyer for a large state transportation agency. I litigated contracts that were probably better measured in feet than in pages, and negotiated those contracts and understood those issues. I also then went to work for the Washington State Senate, handling the transportation committees and the Law and Justice Committee. And there are a lot of important bills that came through those committees as staff that I helped evaluate and help write that impact this industry. I also was intimately involved in the negotiations that led to the 2015 transportation revenue package, and that some of your members may still be working on those projects. I'm currently the general counsel for the Building Industry Association of Washington. We work very closely with ABC on a number of issues that impact the industry, and I'm fighting every day for all 8,000 of our members and the industry generally either in legislation or in court. So I'm running because I believe the most serious threat that we face is the economic impact of this COVID crisis. And I think the construction industry is uniquely poised to be able to help our country, our state, and the district in being able to bounce back from that.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. So the tech glitch obviously makes it harder to hold everyone to 2 minutes. We gave a little allowances with the opening, but we'll try to do that. I think we've got the bug fixed. So thank you, candidates. We're going to move to the Q&A portion of the virtual town hall. The first question comes from Mari Barrero, CEO of American Abatement and Demo.
My name is Mari Barrero, President and CEO of American Abatement and Demo, and I have an open shop question for the candidates. State and local governments are feeling the financial squeeze from the impacts of COVID. This puts public projects at the risk of being delayed or even scrapped, and places added pressure on the federal government to increase financial support to ensure that critical projects can be undertaken and completed. According to the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2019, about 19% of Washington's workforce is union affiliated, down 1% from 2018, and overall, 12.8% of the construction economy workforce is union affiliated. In other words, about 6 of every 7 construction workers in Washington are open shop. This is a significant decline from the peak of about 35% union labor in the mid-1950s, shortly after ABC was formed. In addition, fundamental economics tells us that costs increase when constraints on competition are imposed, such as laws that require union labor. Knowing this and considering the financial pressures at every level of government, that puts public works and living wage jobs in jeopardy during these difficult financial times. Is it responsible to exclude open shops from bidding on public works? Please explain your position.
Thank you, Mari. For the audience's benefit,
My name is Mari.
For the audience's benefit, the question is on the screen and will appear as each candidate responds. And we'll start with Jackson Maynard.
Thank you. So, I want to answer the question by kind of backing up a little bit, talking about the plan that I have to impact the economy with regard to the COVID virus, and then I'll answer more directly the question as a cost-saving measure. So HIT stands for Housing Construction, Infrastructure Improvements, and Technology. I'll talk about housing construction a little bit later, but for infrastructure, we have tremendous needs in the South Sound. All of us have been stuck on I-5 at one point or another, and it's completely unnecessary. There are so many transportation options that we should explore, from road construction to expansion of our ferry system and improvement of our terminals, as well as making Olympia a regional airport again to take some of the pressure off of SeaTac. There's a whole lot that we can do in terms of infrastructure and potential work for the construction industry in this part of the Sound, and it's a bipartisan proposal. This is something that both Nancy Pelosi and President Trump have discussed. So there's a lot of interest in that, but we need to look at how to do these projects better. And I do believe that we should not limit ourselves just to closed shop or labor shops. We should have open shops as well. The competitive bidding process is very important. It allows everyone, gets the best cost for the taxpayers, but also allows, prevents conflicts of interest. I'll give you an example of how not to do it. So in Senate Bill 5116, which was the governor's clean energy bill, there were great tax incentives to help encourage the development of clean energy, but those tax incentives were only available effectively if you had a project labor agreement, so only available to union shops. I think that's the wrong direction. you know, it's not a pot shot. I think our records are fair game here, but I would point out that Representative Reeves did vote for that bill. I think the Green New Deal also has similar provisions, and I think that's the wrong direction for the state and the country. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that question. So as we think about the massive investments that take place in infrastructure, we know that we have needs in the 10th district, in the entire Puget Sound region in the state. And government spends tens of billions of dollars on infrastructure. And that's everything from roads to bridges to mass transit. And when I think about infrastructure and what I hope to see happen in Congress coming out of COVID, we also need to think about housing. Affordable housing is essential infrastructure, and even the conversation about having clean energy and greening our grid. So there are big opportunities. Now, the data points that were provided about the fact that there are most shops that are closed is something that speaks to another issue, which is we do not have enough labor to do the jobs. And so if we want to provide jobs for people, especially for communities of color and underrepresented communities, I believe that there is an opportunity to think about, you know, how we're going to open it up so that everyone has a chance to get those jobs. Now, I am a fan of prevailing wage because nothing is better for an economy or for business than people with spending power. So I support prevailing wage. But I think the question becomes, are there things along the entire production and design and build stream where we can actually reduce some costs? We know that permitting costs a lot of money. And so as we talk about how we're going to do this the right way, I believe that we need to be inclusive and give as many people as possible a chance to take advantage of these huge investments in public works. We also need to make sure that when people are part of this, that they're being paid a decent wage and get decent benefits, because I don't want to see like a two-tier system where some people get paid well and others that don't. That's discrimination. So if we're going to do this, let's be open about it and make sure it's inclusive. And are there rules that we can apply to say that if someone is a minority or women-owned business, that there are ways that they can be part of this, not necessarily have to get penalized or not be able to participate? It has to be inclusive. I think the other thing I would say too, though, is we think about the fight for talent. The construction industry is getting older and people are retiring. We do not have enough people going into those professions. And so there's an opportunity for apprenticeship and training to build up that workforce to do the work. But I look at public works, I look at construction, and I see this as, yes, a way to build the essential things that we need in this community so that people can move easier. We can move goods and services. We can put people to work, especially after COVID, but also recognizing that it has to be truly inclusive. I was on the board of Sound Transit. I helped advocate for the Puget Sound Gateway project. I'm endorsed by both Jake Fye and Steve Hobbs, who serve as chairs of their respective transportation committees. And so I have a lot of experience dealing with these types of projects. As mayor of Tacoma, I helped shepherd through the largest infrastructure package in the history of our city, and it hadn't been done for 40 years. And so for me, this is about fixing the things that need fixing to help us get a better grade from the American Society of Engineers, because our infrastructure is shameful in this country, but also putting people back to work and making sure that we're doing it in the most inclusive way as possible. So if we need to be more open and allow more contractors to participate, I support that, but we cannot compromise jobs that pay well and good benefits so that people can be treated fairly. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. So my background is in human resources, and where I would go with this is that the hallmark of our society and our economy is competition, both competition for the contracts and competition for talent in the job market. And as a small business owner, I know that we have to learn how to balance those two. And so as I'm bidding on a project, I have to look at what it's going to cost me, what the talent is going to cost, and also what's going to keep me competitive on that bid. I absolutely do not think it's responsible to exclude open shops from bidding on public works projects. We need the labor, and as Mari said, there are 6 out of 7 shops are open shops. So by limiting it to union shops only, we're reducing the labor pool that we have available for these jobs. Meanwhile, we are reducing competition and enforcing external pricing structures that drive up the cost of construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Christine Reeves, it's your turn.
Yeah, Yeah, so this is a great question, and one where in a lot of ways I agree with my party in that I am a pro-union Democrat. I believe that unions bring about an opportunity for living wage jobs and an opportunity to help pull families out of, you know, poverty and into the middle class. My grandfather was actually a mason and had a construction business of his own. So I've seen firsthand bringing his family out of you know, the Great Migration and into the Pacific Northwest, the opportunity he had to build a thriving business for his family. But I'll tell you, it's also where my party and I disagree, because I believe that as an economic developer, competition in the market is what drives our economy. And it's one of the, you know, as I recognize that Mr. Maynard would like to, you know, throw me under the bus as just another Democrat. What I do know is that there needs to be a balance. And one of the biggest places, having served for 3 years on the housing committee in the legislature, that my party and leadership and I disagreed was that at the end of the day, if we're trying to solve a housing crisis, if we're trying to make sure that our economy is thriving, discontinuing competition in the market isn't how we're going to solve this problem. When you're trying to meet supply and demand, you've got to have as many folks at the table building as fast as they possibly can to make sure that we're going to be able to meet the need for a growing region, whether that's in housing, whether that's in transportation infrastructure, whether that's in broadband infrastructure, whether that's in the commercial space. And so I want to be clear, yes, there are definitely things that make me a Democrat. There are also things that I think when you compare folks in this race, we have candidates who would like to socialize the entire system and tell you that the only people who can compete are folks in the labor community. But what I would tell you is I am most interested in making sure that small businesses have a path to success in this economy. I want to make sure that working families can put food on the table and keep a roof over their head. And the reality is that that requires balance. It requires people who are willing to look outside of their partisanship and willing to look across the aisle. I've been really honored to have the opportunity to partner with folks like Andrew Barkis and others to fight to make sure that we're creating an economy that puts people first and puts food on the table and keeps a roof over folks' head. And that's the value. That's the core of the work that I am doing. Do I always get it right, Mr. Maynard? Probably not. But at the end of the day, what I'm going to fight for is making sure that you and your family have every opportunity, the same way that I'd like my family to have those opportunities, the same way I want everybody on this call to have a path to economic opportunity, to educational opportunity, and to a future that includes us all.
Well, thank you. Thank you, candidates. Annette Demps of ABC member A&D Quality Construction brings our next question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annette Demps. I am the managing member of A&D Quality Construction Company. And my question today is in regards to economic equality. Article 3 of ABC's bylaws includes the following statement. We believe that work opportunities in this nation should be made available to all of our people, regardless of race, color, creed, age, sex, national origin, membership or non-membership in a labor organization or other protected class. And we support programs toward this end. Knowing this, what ideas do you have to provide economic opportunities for women-owned and minority-owned businesses in general, and specifically within the construction economy? Please be specific with your answer.
Thank you, Annette. We'll lead with Christine Reeves' response.
Hi.
Well, thank you. So this is actually something that we've worked on for years. And I think as we are in the middle of a national conversation on social justice and equity and inclusion, I think it's clear that the institutions that we operate in, quite frankly, don't work for everyone, don't include everyone. And so, you know, this is someplace where I feel that we actually do need to do some rectification in terms of how we support our small business community, how we create access to opportunity for folks, because I do believe that we need to be providing equal opportunity to everyone. And it's clear that through some specific policies at the federal level, whether it's issues around financing of loans, whether it's access to capital, whether it's being able to access workforce development programs, we know that not all things have been created equally. So to answer your question specifically, a couple of things that I'd like to see us do. I absolutely believe that we need to look at our finance system and offer opportunities for low interest loans to women and minority owned businesses. I would also throw in veteran owned businesses. This is something that we fought for both at the state level and the federal level to increase access to opportunity for these communities and create equity and parity in the market. I believe that we need to provide opportunity beyond just the set-asides that are currently offered in the federal system, because quite frankly, we know those set-asides aren't actually being met, and that nobody's really holding anyone accountable to meet those set-asides in government contracting. So I want to make sure that as we're advancing equity in the system, that we're actually dismantling the barriers that for far too long have left women-owned, minority-owned, and veteran-owned businesses behind, and make sure that we're advancing opportunities for folks in the financial services market, in the access to capital conversation specifically, and in the contracting space and employment space. So those are three spaces that I would look forward to continuing the work that we've done here in Washington and advance that at the federal level.
Well, thank you for that, Christine. Next is Jackson Maynard.
Thank you. I think that this is an extremely important issue. Diversity in the workplace, and in particular in the construction industry, has been a goal of BIW. I know ABC of Western Washington has also shared those goals and has worked very hard to try to take steps to increase that. And I do think that Christine made a very good point that the goals for women and minority-owned businesses within the federal system are not being met. And I think there's more in the industry that we can do to try to cultivate those businesses and to encourage them. So for instance, in BIW, I'm going to give you some examples. We have a very active women in professional building organization that recruits women-owned businesses in the construction industry and provides networking opportunities and special classes to assist them and to try to assist them in getting contracts and improving their business opportunities. We also, we're very proud that Sherry Schwab is a woman. She's president of our organization, not the first one, but I think it's a real credit to her that she's been able to work through the leadership of our organization and achieve that honor. But there's more we can do. There's also, we've made an effort in reaching out to minority-owned businesses that maybe English is not their first language. And so we've actually taken the step of translating our marketing materials in an effort to recruit those businesses and bring them into our organization so that they can participate and be a part of the industry. We also have been expanding workforce development. And I know ABC has also been concerned about the lack of qualified folks to do this work in the construction industry. So we've been expanding and entering partnerships with high schools, focusing on scholarships, and especially in either low income or areas where there's communities of color that could be particularly helped by these programs and by the jobs that they generate and the opportunities they generate. I think there's just some common sense things that as an advocate in Congress that I could help with. For instance, at the state level, there's the Office of Minority and Women-Owned Businesses, and I understand that there was an issue just with them processing the applications, and that there was a significant delay. In fact, we got a request at one point from the Department of Transportation. They wanted to start handling their own applications because there had been so many delays. So, I would be in favor of if it's funding, provide more funding and encourage funding at the state or federal level so that when women-owned or minority businesses want to get their applications processed so they can get the contracts that they're entitled to and have an opportunity to bid on those, that their applications are processed in a timely way.
Thanks, Jackson. Okay, so now it's time for Marilyn Strickland's answer.
All right, well, thank you for this question. And I sometimes joke and say that I've been working on this issue for 20 years. And, given the times that we're in, this is an opportunity, I think, for everyone to feel comfortable about this topic and to have some really thoughtful, candid conversations. And I think about the whole term women and minority-owned businesses. And when organizations often present their data, they say, look, we're doing so well. And then when you unpack it, the women part is high, the minority not so much. And so I want to make sure that when we talk about inclusion, that we are truly being inclusive. With that said, there are opportunities to do better. And a lot of minority-owned businesses end up being part of because they're subcontractors, not general contractors. And so working with the GC community to ensure that when they're applying for a job and they're listing a sub that's a minority contractor, are the folks making good on their promises? And also too, are there opportunities one day for a subcontractor to become a general contractor? It's a long road. The other thing I've heard from folks in the contracting community who are minorities is that this is about relationships. It's relationship driven. And so are we having events where subcontractors are actually meeting with GCs so they can get to know each other? So when there's a project to be bid, they have an existing relationship. I'd say another thing that I've heard from the minority contracting community is that there's no enforcement, that people will bid for a job, something will happen, and then somewhere down the way, something falls by the wayside. And so as we look at these public works projects or projects where there is a requirement to have MWBE work on it, is there an enforcement mechanism to make sure that they in fact are getting the work, are doing the work, and more importantly, are getting paid? Because a lot of the MWBEs do not have the same amount of capital behind them. And so not getting paid on time or not getting paid as needed has a huge impact on their ability to make payroll and often hurts their business. And so I think there's some things. So what could we do? We could reinstate affirmative action in Washington State. I-1000 was so close to doing good for a lot of people in construction. So I'd reintroduce something like that. I would ensure that the Small Business Administration continues to fund minority business development agencies, and the city of Tacoma has one, and I was proud to open one there. I think another thing that's important too is ensuring that we understand that it's not just public projects, private projects get built. And there's a way to ensure that private construction projects are being inclusive as well with MWBEs. And then finally, there is a National Minority Supplier Development Council that exists that has lots of tentacles and lots of contacts. So are we able to make sure that those agencies are being stood up and being supported so that we can ensure that there's more exposure? But there's so much to this. So for me, it's about access, it's about relationships, it's making sure that people actually get paid on time, and making sure that they are included as we talk about these mass projects that takes place. There's a way to do it, but we have to have the will to do it. And I think enforcement is also a big part of that. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that, Marilyn. Nancy Daly-Slotnick, you're up.
Oh, so many good points have already been made. So I'm going to start by saying, one, I think the first thing we need to do is focus on actively recruiting young people into the trades and into the construction trades specifically. Letting our young women and minorities know that this is a viable career path for them to start with. And I was so pleased to see that our first two questions actually came from women. And so, but beyond that, when I first got out of the Army, I served on a panel for the best small and medium businesses in the South Sound. And I was one of the judges. And one of the first things I found myself doing on every single company that we evaluated was looking at what their demographics were, because I found companies where the questionnaire, all the employees said, yes, we support treating everyone equally. We have a very inclusive workforce. And then I'd look at their demographics and I'd find out that out of 99 employees, they had one person of color or one woman in the entire agency. And so looking at those and really watching the metrics, enforcing the metrics, and incentivizing meeting the goals, I think are the key to bringing this forward. And everyone else made some amazing points that I didn't want to reiterate.
No worries, Nancy. Thank you. In the spirit of saving a little time, that's never hurts. Our third question is presented by Cindy Axthelm of Axthelm Construction, our Stripe sponsor for the Access to Influence 2020 campaign. Cindy.
I'm Cindy Axthelm, owner of ABC member Axthelm Construction, and my question for the candidates involves affordable housing. 2 years ago, the New Democrat Coalition's Housing Task Force, co-chaired by the Washington's 10th's own Representative Denny Heck, issued a report on the nationwide affordable housing crisis and seeking solutions that address housing insecurity. Last fall, the NDC endorsed 4 pieces of housing legislation that resulted from the report. These bills aim to reduce barriers to development, including streamlining permitting, reforming building codes and zoning ordinances, expanding and reforming housing bond financing and tax credits to encourage development for specific populations, including veterans, extremely low income, Native American communities, rural communities, low-income students, and victims of domestic violence and stalking. If you support the NDC bills, please share how open shop, non-union contractors will benefit from this legislation. If not, please share your ideas on alternative measures to address the affordable housing crisis and how open shop contractors will benefit.
Thank you, Cindy. We'll start with Nancy Daly-Slott.
Okay. Well, I absolutely, as I've looked over all those bills, I think they're all great ways to approach these problems. But I am concerned, I don't see whether or not they have set-asides in them in my quick review of them for non-union shop, or if they are restricted to union shops. And that would be my concern, because the way the question was phrased, I kept looking for that information in those bills and I was not finding it. Because I definitely think we need to have those set-asides for those populations. We definitely need to be building more construction. We just have an overall housing shortage. The supply is not keeping up with the demand, and it's driving the cost of our housing in our communities out of reach for most people. In my neighborhood, a very modest home is running well over $200,000. That's not an affordable house for most young people starting out. So I don't, like I said, I kept looking to see if there were any set-asides for unions in those bills, and I did not find it. But I think it's critically important that they do be available to open shops on all of those levels, so that people can compete in that bidding process. And I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up.
No worries. Thank you, Nancy. Next is Christine Reeves.
Well, thanks for that question. Well, look, as somebody who has experienced homelessness myself, affordable housing is incredibly important as we talk about building an economy that actually works for everyone. But to Nancy's point, I'm a homeowner here in the South Sound, bought my house in 2014 for about $255,000, and I feel very fortunate that I was able to get a loan to do that. Let me tell you today, though, 5 years later, my house is worth almost $400,000. And I haven't built a new structure. I haven't improved the roof. There's not a single thing that I've done to my house that would drive the cost or the value of my house up that much, other than the fact that supply and demand are not meeting in the market in our region. We have nearly 1 million more people moving into the region over the last 9 years, and we've got to do the work to make sure that supply and demand are meeting. As somebody who served on the housing committee, my biggest frustration was that we had a lot of options to be able to make sure that contractors could meet that need, but we were creating more barriers in permitting, land use, in requirements that only nonprofit developers could be able to participate in the process. We've got to make sure that we are creating a competition in the market that meets this demand, because quite frankly, in a global pandemic, in a national economic crisis, continuing to drive up barriers is actually only going to continue to drive up homelessness. And I want to make sure that nobody in this country goes without a house or a roof over their head if they want it. And I think that that's really what we need to be focusing on, is how we solve this short-term problem so everyone can put a roof over their head.
Well, thank you, Christine. Jackson Maynard, you're next.
Thanks a lot. So to go back to my HIT acronym, the H in HIT is housing construction. And the nice thing about that report in these bills is they demonstrate, in the report especially, that housing is a national crisis. The fact that we're 10 million homes short as a country from the inventory that we should have. Here in Washington State, there was another report released earlier this year that showed that we are 250,000 homes short. So that's our state contribution to that national problem. I also like the fact that the report really demonstrated what BIW has been saying, and I know ABC has been saying to the legislature and crying out, saying, look, you can't make housing more affordable by making it more expensive. So by the time you layer on taxes and permitting fees, and all of the other cost drivers, the way that you restrict the ability for people to develop land, and then you add in the appeals process and the expense of that, all of those go into the housing affordability crisis that we have. It contributes to homelessness, and it's something that really is going to take national leadership. And I applaud Representative Heck for the leadership that he showed on this issue in demonstrating it's a national problem. I do need to, again, not intended as a pot shot, but I think it's kind of interesting that both Nancy Slotnick and Christine Reeves now agree that there are things we can do in Congress on housing to address the housing crisis, because when this question was asked at the Women League of Voters, they seemed to imply, well, these are more state issues and not dealt with at the national level. One thing that I would propose is streamlining, for instance, the appeals process. I would like to see an expedited hearing so that when a local jurisdiction imposes an unconstitutional restriction on a permit, that contractor or homeowner can go directly to vindicate a federal due process right and get an expedited hearing in federal court in an expedited appeals process. Now that sounds a little extreme, except when you realize if I'm an NFL player, I get an expedited appeals process if I'm in a dispute over my contract. Now, I love the Seahawks, but if we're going to get serious about dealing with the impacts here to housing that are caused by delays of 5, 10, 15, 20 years in some of this litigation that ties up some of these permits, we've got to start thinking outside the box. I would also say that the costs of permits are pretty extreme. For instance, in the city of Tacoma, again, not intended as a pot shot, where Marilyn Strickland was mayor, it's $10,000 to construct for a shoreline permit. That's added on to additional permits, and those expenses are all plowed into the cost of the house, and they need to be cut back. So I would fight for reduction at the state and federal level of those fees. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackson. Our final candidate response on question 3 comes from Marilyn Strickland.
Well, thank you very much for that question. There is a large enough housing shortage to accommodate both open and closed shops, because we just do not have enough housing, and we know that so much more needs to be built. As Jackson pointed out, we are 250,000 units short just here in the Puget Sound alone over the past 10 years. So we need more housing. But I will tell you this, one of the biggest barriers to adding more housing is local land use laws. That's a fact. And you know that there's nothing more controversial than land use when it comes to government. I've lived it for 10 years. I know this is a fact. So as we talk about how we add more housing, can the federal government have a role? Absolutely. But we also have to understand that the public and private sector must work together to make this happen. The public sector alone does not have the resources to address our housing problems. So how do we find ways to work together? How do we sit down and say, how do we make it easier to build as much housing as quickly as possible that is high quality and safe? That's always important here. So some things that we can do at the federal level, we can triple down on this amazing tool called the low-income housing tax credit. That is one of the most efficient ways to get more low-income housing built. The other thing we can do is look at HUD vouchers. There are a lot of people on Section 8 who use vouchers, but they are inflexible. If we make them more flexible, they will have access to more places to live. And then finally, the federal government needs to make a bigger investment in housing. We need to do this. It'll put people to work. And I said earlier, let's treat affordable housing like basic infrastructure. But we also know this, we need housing at all income levels. We need folks who are at the lower end of the income scale. We need homes for working families. We need homes for people who are just starting their careers in nursing and teaching. So as we think about the need, it is there along the entire spectrum. And there's one population I want to make sure that we are not missing here. This is low-income senior housing. We have an aging population that is getting larger, and people are living longer, and we want to make sure that people can live with dignity. And so as we have a population that's aging, are we building sufficient low-income senior housing? Because there is such a high demand for that. And so I'd say low-income housing tax credit, make a much bigger investment, be more flexible about how we use HUD vouchers, and remember that there is enough housing to be built for both open and closed shops. And the private sector must be at the table to have this conversation. And again, I'm going to come back to the whole conversation about contracting. It has to be inclusive. There are so many local, small, minority-owned businesses that can benefit from this boom. We have to bring people to the table and find ways for them to participate as business owners, as entrepreneurs. Thanks.
Well, thank you, candidates. Next is question 4, presented by Tim Carpenter of Groveland Construction, another Access to Influence sponsor.
Hi, I'm Tim Carpenter, owner of Groveland Construction, with an apprenticeship question for the candidates. In March, the U.S. Department of Labor issued a new rule that established a process to evaluate and recognize industry-recognized apprenticeship programs, or IRAPs. ABC believes that as our economy grows and more opportunities are born, it is imperative that Americans obtain the skills and knowledge necessary to acquire and succeed at the jobs of tomorrow. Unfortunately, the construction industry was excluded from the final rule. ABC believes the exclusion of any industry from a nationally recognized apprenticeship program, whether initially or permanently, would be an impediment to innovation and industry advancements in the workforce development and safety. Excluding the construction industry is inconsistent with the expansive purpose of the proposed rule and is neither authorized nor required by the statutory and regulatory authority as cited in the proposed rule. Would you support and advocate for inclusion of the construction industry if elected?
Thank you, Tim. Marilyn brings our first response.
Okay, so one of the questions I would ask is, why did the construction industry want to be excluded? And I know that I've had conversations with folks in the building trades, and the concern is about the quality of the apprenticeship programs. Are the standards high? Are people getting enough hours in? And are we going to produce a workforce that's going to be able to do the work? And so that's one question I would have. So as far as including or excluding, I'm willing to have the conversation about it, but the question I ask is, why was there a choice made to be excluded for something?
So it's worth you knowing, Marilyn, that the ABC was advocating to be included.
Okay.
And that while the question has come up about quality of apprenticeship programs, in Washington, for instance, ours are second to none, comparable to what the unions offer, and nationally we feel they're the same. We wanted to be included and we're shut out.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you, Andy. And so as we talk about this, you know, it's about transparency and looking at the differences and finding out how and why this is going to happen. And so I'm willing to have the conversation and ask people, okay, if people are being excluded, and you said that they're comparable, so let's sit down and find out if there's another underlying issue here. I would also say too, though, as we look at this rule and what it means, you know, ideally we want to include everyone in everything, because again, we want to have high standards. We want people to get access to apprenticeships, and we want them across a lot of different industries. At the city of Tacoma, for example, you know, we had a pre-apprenticeship program in all of our public works projects, and they were high quality and they were approved, and people who benefited from them, especially younger people who were just starting their careers. The other thing we did too was we looked at some of our goals that we had to ensure that people of all backgrounds, and again, this is about diversity, equity, and inclusion, were a part of this. So my question for you maybe again, Andy, is, you know, as we talk about these rules and what it means for IRAP, if the standards are the same, then why is there a desire to exclude people? And how do we find a way to get there together? If there is mutual benefit, I'm willing to have that conversation. If there isn't, let's talk about how we get to that place. And so my answer right now is I want to learn more. I want to find out how we sit down together and hash this out so that we can all be included. And if we're all included, it benefits everyone, because we all want access to high quality apprenticeships and the ability to do the work.
Well, thank you, Marilyn. Next up is Nancy Daly-Slotnick.
Thank you for that question. I love this question because I am a huge advocate that we are pushing too many people towards formal education that really would be better served by apprenticeship programs. And I believe that the construction industry is a key industry where apprenticeship programs are the appropriate method of teaching people what they need to know. So as I believe that as long as we are, I would absolutely advocate and push for adding the construction industry to these programs, and as long as there is good quality control and the standards are maintained across the board. And I'll keep it short.
Well, there you have it. That's great. Thank you, Nancy. We'll hear from Christine Reeves next.
Well, I would echo what my colleagues have also said, but I'll share. I'm somebody who spent over a decade working to ensure that veterans transitioning out of their service to our country have the opportunity to find career pathways through apprenticeships and on-the-job training. We've built nation-leading models here in the Pacific Northwest, right at Joint Base Lewis McChord, for apprenticeship programs that ensure that our veterans have access to opportunity when they leave service, and have been proud to partner with a variety of different industries. We've done it with Microsoft's Software Systems Academy. We've done it in coding for ADA, with women veterans going into coding systems. We've done it with the HVAC system. We've done it with helmets to hard hats. There's been a variety of different programs that have functioned in this way. And I think my biggest question would just be one of, I think to the mayor's point, why are people excluding you all from this process? Because ultimately, we know that not everybody wants to go to a four-year college. Not everybody wants to go to two-year college. And yet we need to be building an economy that puts people first, that works for everyone. And what that looks like is making sure that everyone has a career pathway that meets their needs and allows their family to put food on the table and keep a roof over their head. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. And the short answer is yes, of course I would advocate for the inclusion of the construction industry as we think about how we build an economy that includes everyone.
Well, thank you, Christine. And closing out question 4 is Jackson Maynard.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think there's any mystery about why the construction industry was excluded. It's because the unions didn't want to allow them to have access to those programs, or to recognize as Andy said, the very fine programs that we have here in Washington State that may not be part of the union apprenticeship programs. Look, I think that unions are great organizations. I participated in negotiations with their representatives in the transportation revenue package, and they serve their members well. And I have no interest at all in changing the current law with regard to union membership. If it's working for the employers and the employees, regardless of whether they're a union shop or not, I'm fine with continuing that. But I do think that we absolutely should advocate for the inclusion of the construction industry. We've got to encourage apprenticeship programs. I'm glad Christine brought up the helmets to hard hat program. I think that's an important program for veterans that uses the apprenticeship programs. And another one that I'm familiar with from my work with the legislature is actually in the prison system. At the women's prison in Purdy, they have a construction training program where women who meet certain criteria are able to get training in the construction trades, and they have positions waiting for them immediately after. And I think we need to encourage that as a part of rehabilitation and expanding our workforce. And I would love to look at additional opportunities to do that. Since the question involved impediments to innovation, there's one other thing I want to talk about briefly in connection with expanding our infrastructure programs, and that is public-private partnerships. We can fund a lot of these projects through the use of private equity. We don't have to rely strictly on tax dollars or tax increases to do a lot of the improvements that we need to do. And these are used effectively all over the country. There's a $2 billion tunnel that was constructed under the Port of Miami that's used every single day, that was constructed largely with private dollars. The reason we don't do that here in Washington State is we have a horrible statute that nobody is willing to change that would allow for public-private partnerships. And we actually have a statute that prohibits the Department of Transportation from considering unsolicited proposals from private parties. So that prohibits innovation in our transportation sector, and that should be changed as well. And I would advocate for that at the state level and for P3s to be included in Congress.
Well, perfect timing there. Thank you, candidates. Our final question is presented by Anita Robertson, owner of ABC member Make Ready Services.
Hi, my name is Anita Robertson, owner of Make Ready Services Cleaning. Last year, the U.S. Department of Labor Inspector General released an audit examining the DOL survey process for collecting and determining the prevailing wage rate for 4 types of construction projects. According to the report, the Inspector General found that 3% of the 134,000 unique published rates or roughly 4,400 had not been updated in 21 to 40 years. Additionally, of 7 sample surveys that analyzed 124 wage rates, the Inspector General found 48% of the rates were not determined from data about a single construction worker within 31 counties that the published rates represented. Finally, the report found union wage prevailed for 48% of wage determinations, even though less than 13% of the U.S. private construction workforce is unionized. Would you support using BLS data to calculate prevailing wage instead of the survey process? Since repealing the Davis-Bacon Act is not realistic, what ideas would you have to reform Davis-Bacon to secure a more representative sample size distribution between open shop and union-affiliated companies?
Thank you so much, Annette.
Hi, I'm Anita Robertson, owner of Make Ready Services.
Response to our final question of the town hall.
Great, thank you very much. So I do believe that we need to look closely at prevailing wage and other cost drivers to find ways to, especially with public works projects, to find ways to drive down costs. One of the it is unfair, frankly, that a school district or a local government in Tenino or Grand Mound should be paying the same wage as they pay in Seattle simply because the surveys that are going to be completed happen to be from that area. And I know that if you talk to Senator King about this, and incidentally, I've been endorsed by Senator King. He's now ranking member of transportation, was at one point chair of transportation, but he will discuss in great detail his frustration with the prevailing wage system, for instance, in Yakima, and how that affects projects and drives costs. So I think we need to look at it. One of the things we did in the transportation revenue package in 2015 was to allow for online surveys to be completed because a lot of times the surveys are pretty paperwork intensive and you have to mail them in, and it's added to the paperwork of just you trying to run your business. And so there's a disincentive for businesses, especially if they're non-labor, to want to complete those surveys. So I'm for anything that will give us an accurate estimate of the wages that are actually being charged, so that we can make sure we have the best information. I do think we also need to look at other cost drivers in the system, certainly taxes and fees. I hate to bring this up, but again, not intended as a pot shot, but we had we came into the 2019 session with $6 billion extra dollars, and Christine Reeves, when she was in the legislature, voted to increase taxes on top of that by another $2.5 billion. Those taxes fell heavily on the construction industry, and I think that you need to find ways to decrease taxes on businesses so that they can get ahead, as well as permit fees. The other thing is we need to find ways to ensure, as I mentioned before, that when there's permits, that they can get an expedited system. There was a church that as local city government, it was actually Tacoma, when Marilyn Strickland was mayor, denied their permit and actually wanted a 30-foot easement for a piece of property that they had. It was litigated all the way to the state Supreme Court. We had to file an amicus brief, but it's those types of costs that that increase construction. So we need to look at all cost drivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackson. Marilyn Strickland, it's your turn.
Thank you. So the question here really is, how do we avoid, what goes into determining what prevailing wage is? And I think that when we do this, it should be transparent, it should be inclusive. And I say that having been through a class and compensation study at the city of Tacoma, which took a long time and had a lot of conversations about where we were pulling the data. And so I believe that it should be a hybrid situation where we come from a lot of different sources and determine what prevailing wage should be. I support Davis-Bacon. I support a prevailing wage. But out of transparency, to make sure that it's fully accurate, I support getting input from a lot of different sources, not to drive costs down, not to drive it down, nor to make it go up, but so it's fair and equitable, understanding that different markets have different pay scales. Now, with that said, we talk about the importance of having public works projects serve as job programs for people. And coming out of COVID, we know that this is going to be one way that we come back to an economic recovery. It's going to be investing in infrastructure. And so as we look at Davis-Bacon and what prevailing wage means, I am for being transparent about how we calculate it and maybe casting a wider net of how we determine what it is. But again, it needs to be fair, it needs to be equitable, and it needs to be transparent. And as far as the permitting fees that take place in local government, it's pretty much a cost of service model. The amount of hours that staff spends on something is typically how we cover it. But we know that when it comes down to fees and priorities and how we put projects in a queue, there are opportunities to move some projects to the top of the queue. For example, affordable housing project, emergency shelters, things that help support low-income and veterans who need homes. I think those are opportunities to do that. But the conversation about land use is definitely very localized. I completely agree. And going back to the Davis-Bacon conversation, it's the prevailing wage is something that we know is going to be in effect. And the question is, how are we calculating it? So coming from a bigger pool of resources to determine what it is and doing so, again, transparently, I think is one way to address some of the concerns that people have.
Well, thank you, Marilyn. Next, we'll hear from Nancy Daly-Slotnick.
Well, thank you for that question. I have to say, as I look at prevailing wage laws, that I actually find prevailing wage laws to be more relevant than, say, a federal minimum wage, because they are, if done correctly, based on the local economy, not based on a national model. And so I think that the key here is increasing transparency, increasing accuracy, making sure that they truly are local and representative of the community where the job is located. So I absolutely think that we should be making sure that they're local, using BLS data as mentioned in the question itself. It would be a great way to do that, and making sure our sample sizes are accurate. And I do want to go back just really briefly and address that I believe that both Christine Reeves and I did say in the other debate that we were in that there was a federal role in construction of housing. It just wasn't the red tape that was specifically being addressed in the question, which were all addressed to local permitting processes. Federal doesn't have a role in the permitting process or in our state's Growth Management Act. And thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. And now Christine Reeves will close out question 5.
Yeah, well, I actually think I'm going to take this opportunity to respond to Mr. Maynard, because I think it was pretty clear at the beginning of this that we were all going to agree not to take pot shots at each other, and yet we've spent this entire time listening to Mr. Maynard preface all of his pot shots by saying not to be a pot shot. I think when you have to preface it that way, the reality is you are trying to take a pot shot. And so what I'll just say, I think that's actually what's part of the problem here. We've gotten to a political system that is so focused on hyper-partisan politics and focusing on what's wrong with each other rather than focusing on how we come together to fight for each other. The reality is we are not going to get through a global pandemic, through a national conversation on equity and inclusion, or through an economy that isn't working for everyone if we're not willing to actually have the conversations about where we agree and where we don't agree and be willing to work together to get to yes. Look, I think to Nancy's point, you're absolutely right, Nancy. We did preface that question, and it was very specific to a local housing question, not to federal role in housing authority. So I think to misrepresent previous conversations on other calls is unrealistic, and I think really, quite frankly, focused on partisan, hyper-partisan politics. To be clear, I don't think anybody is going to disagree that as a Democrat, I believe that Davis-Bacon and prevailing wages are important. But I think this is one place where I would work across the aisle with my colleague, Ms. Slotnick, to say that I do believe that when we look at prevailing wages, and we've seen this when we work on military contracts, when we see this for our defense companies where I've spent over a decade working, that prevailing wage for downtown Seattle is not prevailing wage for downtown Omak or for downtown Ording. And the reality is we need to get to a more regionalized, more local control over how that wage data is compiled and make sure that the cost of living in Ording is not the same as it is in downtown Seattle. And we need to make sure that folks have the ability to pay their workers a fair wage, to make sure that folks can put food on the table and keep a roof over their head. But at the end of the day, recognize that we all don't live in Seattle, and quite frankly, don't want to live in Seattle. It's why we live in the South Sound, because we like it here. We like being able to raise our children in a community that's safe. We like being able to go to work every day knowing that we can put food on the table and keep a roof over our head. And that's the fight that we should be having, is how we're going to work together to make sure that every single kid in this country has access to educational opportunity, to make sure that every single family in this country has access to economic opportunity, and to make sure, quite frankly, that we are putting problem solving over partisan politics at the end of the day. And that's what I'm committed to doing in this process.
Well, thank you, candidates. This concludes the Q&A segment of ABC's first ever virtual town hall. Candidates are now given 2 minutes each for their closing statements. A reminder for the ABC audience to please remain in the event following closing statements, and we'll start the closing statements with Christine Reeves.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for having me today. It is always a pleasure to get to come and chat with you all. I've been honored to be a partner to you all in the legislature over the last 3 years that I've served in the State House. I look forward to the opportunity to continue to be a partner with you all. I have really valued the contributions that you bring to our communities, to the hard work that you have joined us in making sure that our kids have educational opportunity and can thrive in our communities, making sure that working families have a safe place to go to work every day and can contribute to our economy in a meaningful way. And I look forward to the opportunity to reduce the barriers that keep us from being able to not just survive, but to actually thrive in our economy. And so welcome the opportunity to continue to work to earn your support, to ask you to help send a working mom to Washington, D.C. to keep fighting for our families, for our communities, and for an economy that's going to put people first. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Christine. Jackson Maynard.
Thank you very much. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these issues, and they are extremely important issues. Yeah, I would like to briefly respond to Christine, and please understand I have tremendous respect for you and Marilyn and Nancy and anybody else that goes through this process and has a track record of public service, even if we're going to disagree on some of the policies and some of the votes. I do think it is fair to bring up votes. I think that when ABC of Western Washington decides whether you're going to give your endorsement, you need to do so looking not just at what people say, but at their track record and at their experience and what they've done. Have they done things that benefit the construction industry, or have they done things, in fact, that made it harder for you guys to do your, and ladies to do your jobs? I spend every single day as general counsel of BIW fielding your phone calls, responding to your emails, and listening to the difficulties, and then brainstorming with our government affairs team, sometimes often in concert with ABC of Western Washington, to figure out how we're going to try to make your lives better. And that's what I want to do in Congress. So, you know, I don't think I'm being hyper partisan, given that my comments were directed to both the other Republican on the panel, as well as the Democrats. And I think it is fair to bring up the folks' records. But again, you know, I just would ask that you carefully consider your endorsement, and you think about who has the background, the experience, and has a demonstrated ability to understand the construction industry and to fight for that. And that's what I want to do in Congress. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jackson. Next, Marilyn Strickland is up.
Well, thank you to the hosts of this forum. It's been a very interesting experience, and I'm honored to be here. So I'm a lifelong Democrat who ran a chamber of commerce, and I am acutely aware of the needs of business. This is always about economic opportunity for all people. Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you own a contracting firm, whether you're a subcontractor, this has always been about economic opportunity for all people. It's what I've spent my career doing. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Bob Armstead, who is part of the National Association of Minority Contractors of Washington, one of the founding members. When I ran for mayor, I had the endorsement of the master builders in Pierce County. And so I know and understand what the needs are of the private construction industry. Now, with that said, I've also been proud to be someone who advocated and got these large public projects to become reality. I was on the board of Sound Transit. We passed the largest measure in the history of Tacoma to rebuild our roads and our streets. And so as we think about what's possible, I think what's also important as you think about who you want to endorse is who do you think is likely going to win this election? I'm proud to have the endorsement, the sole endorsement of the Seattle Times, the largest newspaper in Washington state, and a myriad of different people representing different industries, leaders who we know and trust. And so as we talk about who you want to endorse, I want to let you know I will always be a willing partner. I have put so much work in doing work for the minority and women-owned business community, especially with contracting, but also too, I understand business. I've worked in both the public and private sectors. I understand the relationship between business and government. As a mayor in a nonpartisan position, I was not focused on going left or going right, but moving forward. This is about moving our country forward after a pandemic. It's about how we come together, and it's about how we work together every day to provide economic opportunity for as many people as possible. Thank you, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, Marilyn. And finally, Nancy Daly-Slotnick. Nancy, you're muted.
Just kidding. I thought I had unmuted. So I want to thank the ABC of Western Washington for inviting me to this forum. Since the beginning of my run for Congress, I have been very focused on homelessness issues in our community and the economic impact on the homeless veterans and the homeless who just were one paycheck short of being on the street. And a few years ago, I watched my son and now daughter-in-law, but when they were engaged, and they were talking about buying a home, and they started looking at what housing costs in our neighborhood. And I remember my daughter-in-law in tears saying, all we're going to be able to afford is a trailer. And they were very fortunate. They did find a home, and they live about 4 miles from me. But it really brought home to me the importance of housing and the importance of increasing our supply of affordable housing in our community. And so I just would be honored to get the endorsement of the ABC of Washington as the daughter-in-law of a carpenter, the wife of a construction worker, and the sister-in-law of a non-union carpenter, but also a contractor to Sound Transit. We've had a contract with Sound Transit for private security, for security risk and threat and vulnerability assessments. And we have helped them to make all of their facilities safer. And now we're on the front end of that as a contractor to their construction companies on pre-design to make sure that we've got safe facilities going in. So I would be honored to have the endorsement of the ABC of Western Washington, and I'm going to wrap it up and save the time.
Well, I have to say, it's great to get to the end of the candidate forum and actually be just a little ahead of schedule. I have to say it's a team effort, and all of our candidates cooperated on that. We were sending the messages saying, hey, we're a little behind, so way to go. I want to thank our candidates. We hope you enjoyed the opportunity to address, I'm going to come on screen so you can all see me. We hope you enjoyed the opportunity to address our members as much as we enjoyed having you here today. The decision on primary election endorsement and the campaign contribution from ABC of Western Washington PAC will be made on Friday. Members will make their recommendation to the GA Council and the Board of Directors next. Your campaigns will be notified via email, or I'll just probably give you a call late Friday afternoon, and the check will literally be in the mail. The endorsement will be announced to our members in Monday morning's News of Merit. And with that, candidates and your staff, you are dismissed. Members, stay around.
Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
so
Wear
much.
masks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
You bet.
Bye.
See you guys. Is it clear? I still see Jackson. Janessa, are we clear?
I'm removing Jackson,
Oh, okay.
and we should be good.
Okay. So let's briefly review how the vote works. You've heard from the candidates, and now it's your turn to help us to select a candidate, if any. So you'll be choosing a candidate for our endorsement for the primary election, which comes up on August 4th. So as you select your choice, consider a number of factors, some of them that the candidates brought up. How thorough was each candidate's response? Did each candidate play by the rules? Did they complete their answers within the allotted time, or did we need to mute them when time ran out? Voting is for ABC members, their employees, and their voting age family members only, so ABC staff will not be voting. The results today will be a key factor in the final endorsement, along with the strategic considerations when the chapter's Government Affairs Council and Board of Directors choose which candidate, if any, to endorse. So it's time for the Zoom poll vote, and Janessa's going to bring that up. And while she does that, you all have a chance to weigh in. I'm going to touch on a couple of upcoming government affairs events. We have our Free Western Washington event, which is powered by the Free Enterprise Alliance, on Thursday, September 24th from 4 to 6 p.m. It's a virtual event and a fundraiser for the Free Enterprise Alliance, which is part of ABC. We have another town hall scheduled for Tuesday, October 13th. It'll feature Bellingham Mayor Seth Fleetwood, who wants to share some news about plans for the city and for the urban core that include a lot of mixed-use multifamily. So if you are with a business that's had an interest in expanding your operation up north, this is a good opportunity to hear what's going on. Also, we'll feature candidates for the Washington Secretary of State race. Keep an eye out on ABC of Western Washington social media for our ABC Heroes series, along with more information about the Free Enterprise Alliance over the next couple of months. This is brought to you by the Access to Influence 2020 campaign. We're featuring inspirational stories with chapter members who are helping build a better Washington. Another social media campaign will begin in the fall as well. Stay tuned for details, and we encourage our members to share these posts on their own social media pages. It helps us get the word out about ABC of Western Washington and about our amazing members. So thanks once again to our Access to Influence sponsors, Axthelm Construction, Washington Commercial Painters, Groveland Construction, Bernson Porter, and Bennett Electric. And by the way, sponsorship opportunities are still available for the rest of the Access to Influence 2020 campaign. Contact yours truly, Andy, at abcwestraw.org for more information. We certainly hope this forum helps you make an informed decision when you fill out the primary election ballot. And now it's time to share the Zoom webinar poll results. ABC of Western Washington members' recommendation for the endorsement goes to, drum roll, Marilyn Strickland. Okay, well, thank you for that. Remember this, ballots will be mailed on Friday the 17th, and a recording of this town hall will be available through primary election day on August 4th. We want to wrap up by thanking everyone in the room, along with our amazing ABC staff, for their support, putting this event together and making sure things went well this afternoon. Thank you once again. Watch for the video link to share with those who didn't tune in live, along with the endorsement announcement on Monday's News of Merit. Remember to vote, and have a good night. Thanks, everyone.